All right, so we are going to kick off our first panel of the day, what your students really think. So I'm going to introduce the organizers of this session. We've got Sean Jordan from Arizona State University, Kip Coonley from Duke University, Michael Pusateri from Penn State, and Kevin Pham from Georgia Tech. And I will turn it over to Sean to introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Claire. And I am incredibly excited today to have such an amazing panel of speakers who are our students. And the reason why we wanted to lead this workshop today off with students is because at the end of the day, they are the voices that matter the most in education. And here we want to have an opportunity to not only listen, but reflect on our experiences and hopefully hear some things that maybe we've heard some of them before from students locally, but maybe there are things that they have to share with us will help us think more expansively about not only what is it that we have experienced over the last year, but what can we learn and what can we translate into the future. And so with that, I will hand it over to our students to introduce themselves, and then they're going to jump right into the panel. So Zach, can you start us off?
So hello, everybody. I'm Zach. Not sure my picture wasn't uploaded, but that's okay. I'm basically a senior in electrical systems engineering at the ASU Polytech campus, and I'm also an undergraduate TA for Dr. Sean Jordan and his embedded systems engineering course. So here at ASU, the pandemic really affected our supporting engineering lab. So basically, most of our classrooms they come equipped with a neighboring lab. And this past semester, since all of our labs were closed, students were actually shipped take-home labs because to keep the courses running, basically.
Great, thank you. And Caleb.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Brooks Lewis. I am a second-year electrical engineering student at Georgia Tech. Excuse me. I transferred to Georgia Tech in the fall of 2020. So I've been here for 2 semesters now, and I think I've had pretty much the same experience as most college students have had when everything went online. Pretty much all of my classes, including lab courses, were all online or hybrid based. Pretty much no face-to-face interaction at all. Yep, I think that's about it.
Great, thank you. And Omar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Omar. So I'm a senior studying biomedical engineering at Duke University. And I am a teaching assistant for the intro level ECE courses here as well. So last March, after COVID happened, Duke sent home all of its students, as many universities did. And then we switched to a completely online learning format for labs and classes. But with rigorous COVID testing this fall and this spring, we have allowed students to come back for hybrid formats for labs and classes. Specifically for ECE, we send students with kits to substitute for their actual lab material. But this spring as well, we've been glad to bring students back into the lab as well to do some lab with the actual equipment.
Great, thank you, Omar. And last but not least, Hisham.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hisham. I'm currently an undergraduate studying physics with focus on electronics at Penn State University. I was able to take lab, fortunately, in person, and then during the pandemic, when like halfway through the semester, we went fully remote. And Penn State this past semester has gone fully remote, focusing on the use of the National Instruments MyDAC. I have some wires still connected. They used that. That was how our lab focused it, and they're planning to bring a full in-person lab by the fall semester, so hopefully that goes well. Also, I just want to note something. I have another screen to my right, so if you see me looking to the right, I'm not ignoring anybody while they're talking.
That is great, wonderful. Well, thank you very much to our panelists, and they have questions that they're going to ask each other, so that way we can hear student perspectives. And so, Zach, I believe you have the first question. Feel free to start us off.
Yep. So to kick off the student panel, basically, the big question is with this move towards in-person labs and like maker spaces reopening, if you were a professor, what would you keep from the pandemic? Like what teaching styles, what learning strategies would you keep from this pandemic?
So I'm glad to speak on that, Zach. So one of the big things that we've seen professors do at Duke is send home, like I said, these laboratory kits for students this semester and last semester as well. I really think this has been a great change. There's a big disconnect from, let's say, like lab and students' personal lives, but having these kits in their dorms, I've seen students come into lab really excited, more creative, saying, I had some free time, I was really bored, so I just like brought out my kit and I did some like brief coding on my Arduino and look what I made. I think that before, having to go all the way to lab and only having access to certain equipment during those lab times doesn't really allow students to be creative and explore all of their options that they have while studying ECE.
Nice. Did anybody want to add on to that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in here. So one of the things that I have really, I guess, enjoyed about classes being online is that pretty much all my lectures are recorded. All the class notes get published to the course website. So I've been kind of like what Omar said, where I've been able to kind of do my classes on my own time. And if I have more time, I can always go back and watch a lecture a second time, which you really can't do in person. So I definitely think going forward, one of the things that I would like to see in my professors' classes is maybe if we could record classroom lectures and just publish as much material as possible, just so students can go back and whenever they have free time, maybe double check their knowledge and just really dive into the material.
I also agree with that. I like how this semester there's a lot of video lectures. So if you're not quite up to speed in class, you can always go back and refer to the lecture.
To add on to that, another thing I noticed more from the students' perspective is ever since we've gone online, pretty much every single class I have has had some kind of group chat or Discord chat or GroupMe or weekly Zoom meetings or something like that. And I've seen professors encourage it as well. So while in person, it's better to meet in person face to face. I think this is something that like should stay as we move forward because it's actually really useful that, hey, I can't meet at 8 o'clock, but I can send the chat saying, does anybody have any help or ideas on how to do problem 2 on the homework or how to do this section of the lab? I found that really useful.
I also agree with that, Sham. I know a lot of the times in industry, there's meetings, everybody's overlapped. So a lot of the times having a general workspace for everybody is a good thing to have. In my opinion, what I would really like to keep is access to virtual office hours if the course could have that. Because I am currently a UGTA for Dr. Jordan's class, but I took it last year. And one of my big problems was when I was working on something and I couldn't figure it out, I would have to transfer all of my sensitive components either in a box in my backpack to our maker lab and then seek help there. But the hard thing is it's really hard to recreate the problem once it's been moved. So I like the whole idea of just being able to pop into a Zoom room, ask a TA or a professor for some help, receive some feedback, and then continue working. It makes it very seamless. It's a very seamless transition. Okay, moving on to the next question at hand. Let me see here.
I can take that over, Zach.
Sounds good, man.
All right, so now that we talked a little bit about like what you guys like and what we should keep, what do you guys think we should avoid? Like what really, like if you were a professor, what would you not do again or had a negative experience with?
I can go ahead and jump in here. So one of the things that I really struggled with throughout the pandemic and with classes being online was fully remote labs. I just had a lot of trouble, especially coming in as a second year student, I really haven't had a whole lot of experience with electronics prototyping really at all. So I had to kind of figure that out remotely on my own. And it was really hard just to get help from like professors and TAs on like debugging a circuit when something wasn't working right. So I had to figure that out a lot on my own. So I think moving forward, one of the things that I would really like to avoid is while remote lectures are something that I guess some students would prefer as opposed to in person. I would like to see labs be for sure moved back just to in person so that it's easier for students to understand and also easier for professors to kind of check whether their students are actually learning the material or not.
I definitely agree with Brooks there, just from a teaching assistant perspective. I will say one of the greatest challenges that I've faced this semester is teaching students breadboarding over Zoom. While we all might think that breadboarding is a really simple skill, having students show a breadboard on the camera quality may not be that great. You really can't see where like small components are connected on a board. So I definitely think that that's something that maybe we should definitely try to get back in person, at least for the intro to it. Maybe later on having students do things on their own like would be great. But initially those intro labs are, I think, very important, especially for students who've never seen it before.
Also, to add on that, I know Sid earlier was saying that students try to avoid Zoom just because we're on it so much. So I think we should really avoid just video lectures, just any type of video lecture, unless it's like supportive material. I love supportive material lectures where after class you can learn more about the topic. But I think professors that say, oh, the video lectures online, today's a lab. I think we should really avoid just pure video lectures since this pandemic has really kept us tethered to our laptops.
All right, so with that, I think we can move on to the next question. So now that you've taken classes online for at least 2 semesters now, and are starting to take classes that require those as prerequisite material, how well prepared do you feel about those, and how well prepared do you feel to go back to in-person courses?
So here, I definitely think that there is some nervousness returning to in-person courses. I think for especially on my students' parts, that has been expressed to me. I know a lot of courses require you to use lab instruments like oscilloscopes, and students really haven't had the opportunity to use those as much during the pandemic, if at all, in some universities. So I definitely think that professors should keep that in mind, especially moving forward, that whereas before students have used oscilloscopes in their labs, that students may actually need like an intro to a lot of like benchtop equipment, especially in their courses later on, which build upon intro level material.
Yeah, adding on to that, Omar, you're right. I think now that I'm actually thinking about it, because I'm going to be having labs next semester, I realize I haven't used an actual like oscilloscope or a function generator or any of those with like any like full hands-on equipment in almost a year or more. And yeah, having an introductory course, or maybe just having like one class dedicated to just going over stuff like that would be good for your students to actually just like get a refresher and be like, oh yeah, this is how we do it, so they don't struggle more in lab.
Yeah, so also adding on to that, personally, I've had no problems just because the hardest semesters were I was in person, but on a TA side, I kind of noticed that a lot of students are missing out on the collaborative side of learning. So it's different to learn from reading a document rather than learning from group members or maybe like asking the professor like a minute question just to dwell on basically.
Thank you all for the answers. And to follow up on that, what Omar and Hisham said, one of the things that I've really enjoyed was when I was taking classes, a lot of them had components where, you're supposed to learn how to use an oscilloscope or something like that. One of the things that I've really enjoyed is our electrical and computer engineering makerspace is fortunately still open in person. So I've been able to go and learn how to use all those tools there, which have kind of supplemented my learning. So that may be something to really highlight as we move forward.
So I guess we can move on to the next question, which is, what did we enjoy just through the pandemic? What did we enjoy? Just basically everything that happened.
One of the things that I enjoyed the most, and a lot of people have touched on this before, is Zoom meetings. So I've noticed a lot of my professors, since they're not hosting office hours, are doing these one-on-one or like not one-on-one sessions, but they're more open to meeting with students one-on-one over Zoom. And I think I've gotten to know my professors a lot more like personally, and been able to express like my frustrations. Whereas like in a larger classroom, let's say it's office hours and like 12 people show up, I may not really feel comfortable with that. But I also think these one-on-one check-in meetings, that are maybe 5 or 10 minutes with a professor, is something that I've really enjoyed. I feel like I'm much more comfortable with the material and also more comfortable with speaking up in class as well.
Yeah, to second that, I'm typically a very introverted person, and I know a lot of students in ECE kind of are. So one of the things that I've enjoyed is the ability, if I'm in a lecture with, 200 students, it's so much easier just to drop a message in the chat rather than having to stand up in front of, a room full of people and ask the question, at the risk of sounding like you haven't been paying attention or something like that. It's just a lot easier to actually get help from professors without kind of the embarrassment of having to admit you don't know something in front of a room of your peers.
Great. So moving on to the last question, I really want to focus on just like the positives of everything. So how do you think this pandemic has changed you as an engineer for the better?
I can start off. I think this pandemic's changed a lot. It's definitely helped me be a little bit more analytical and focus on myself more. Whereas like during in-person labs or in-person classes, it would be really easy to seek help, or if you were stuck breadboarding something or designing a circuit, you could like just turn around behind you and ask the group behind you, or raise your hand within 2 minutes to get help from the TA. Here, since everything was remote, um, there was kind of a delay in getting help, and that made me be a little bit more kind of like troubleshoot by myself a lot more. And I feel like that's helped me grow as an engineer and as a person, like overall.
Thank you for that. And just bouncing off of that, I definitely agree with all of that. I think it has made me more creative. It has made my students more creative. We're more flexible as well. Whenever we're met with a challenge, it seems like there's a lower stress level and more of like an intuition and desire to try and solve that problem on their own before reaching out. And I think that's also taught students a lot as well.
Yeah, so adding on to that, Omar, I really do believe that it gave students more of an individuality in their group. So basically, every student in the group has an individual mindset on the collective project rather than a collective group project. Because I know a lot of the times when you're in an in-person group, you can get a lot of idea block just because everybody's thinking in the same area. But like when it comes to online learning, everybody kind of gets their sources from multiple places. So it just brings out the individuality of each team member.
Yep. And to follow up on pretty much what everyone has said so far, I feel like I've just been significantly more adaptable coming out of this, just with, I guess, the distance between, professors and TAs where sometimes, if you send an email to someone, they won't get back to you for, a day or two. And sometimes it's really crucial. You need an answer really quickly, for homeworks or labs or whatever. Um, but I feel like I've had to solve a lot of problems by myself, and I've had to kind of figure out how to solve those problems, instead of, like Hisham said, having a TA, looking over my shoulder and make sure I'm doing everything right. I've just had to work through that by myself, and I feel like that's definitely a skill that every engineer should have.
Okay, this has been wonderful. So we want to have an opportunity here to open up for questions from the audience. And I see a number of messages in the chat so far related to Slack and Discord, or none of the above. And so curious to hear from students, one, both, either. What do you like? What do you not like with regard to Slack? And if anyone has additional questions, please type them in the chat and we'll shift those out to the panel as well.
So for me, I think it depends on student, depends on department. But I personally have a collection of like Slack, Discord, GroupMe, group text messages. For me, GroupMe is nice. I think it's a little overwhelming, especially when you open it up and there's 96 messages. I think the thing that's nice about like Slack and Discord is you're able to create like certain channels for specific topics. So if I have a specific question about the homework, I can open up Slack, go to the homework channel and find questions about homework, and not have to look at all the messages about people scheduling meetings. So just them trying to figure out the logistics for when everyone is free.
So adding on to that, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of different uses of group chats. But I think now I kind of dwindled it down to my favorite three. I really enjoy Slack, Discord, and Microsoft Teams. I think Microsoft Teams just works because it's a Microsoft product on mostly Windows computers. Slack is very nice, like Omar was saying, just channels for days. And then Discord is kind of like the newer one to the group. I do enjoy it, but I feel like a lot of the times students can get lost with more personal touches for Discord.
Yeah, actually, I agree with you there, Zach. Discord's a great platform, but it is very easy to get lost in personal conversations, whether funny or serious, on Discord, a lot more than like something like GroupMe or Slack. And to Sid, Discord is free.
Yeah, so to add on to that, I know I had used Discord prior to the pandemic, just for fun to play games with my friends or do all sorts of things. So I think a lot of students kind of when they log into Discord or whatever, they're in an environment that they've previously used outside of the classroom. So I guess when you, put a class Discord or whatever, I guess students like everyone has said, kind of get lost in personal conversations just because, all their other Discord servers or channels or whatever are all personal related. So I think Slack works a lot better because I don't think any students are really using Slack to communicate for fun. So.
That is great. And we've got a question in the chat from Mateja Lampe. His question is, how much value do you see in free online teaching material, lab exercises, or project ideas that industry is submitting in this COVID time? And so how much do you stick with what your professor is giving you versus going out into the Google sphere and finding things yourself too?
I'd like to start this off. I think there's lots of value in online resources outside of just what the professor is providing me. Like I constantly find myself, not to say like the professor's provided material is bad or inadequate, but I myself, I like to gather information from as many sources as I can. So I constantly find myself going to Google, going to looking at data sheets, and usually sometimes the professor doesn't provide them, so I have to get them remotely. But I think other resources are very valuable. Yeah.
I know that for my students for labs specifically, so we've actually at Duke have done this thing where we're trying to get back into like in-person classes, but also still have that online component. Especially for breadboarding, we've been utilizing Tinkercad for simple circuits. It's a great way for students to practice the circuits online before they actually do them in person. We found that is very helpful. And Tinkercad has like their own tutorial exercises for basic circuiting. But also for my students, so Duke's Intro ECE course is focused on an Arduino-based project. I've always encouraged my students to look at outside resources, because if you have a problem, so for example, using a sensor, someone has solved that problem before, right? So looking up data sheets, looking up like other resources, I always encourage, especially because I know design classes heavily focus on you finding materials and like sort of putting them all together to solve your own problem.
Okay, and thank you. Ooh, and we've got another question from Leslie Birch. Do you prefer video or photo and text-based tutorials?
I can go ahead and start on this one. I would say I probably prefer text tutorials a lot more, simply because it's a lot easier if if I'm watching a video or something and I don't really understand a concept, I have to go find where the professor started talking about that section, I guess, and restart from there, as opposed to like a text tutorial. I can see where everything begins and ends, and can just go back and read the part that I need to focus on rather than having to rewatch a whole video. But I know it's a lot easier for professors to make videos than it is text tutorials. I would say I would prefer text, but video are also pretty helpful just because you can go back and rewatch everything.
The one thing I have to say about text tutorials is I do prefer them over videos. Like video tutorials are great, but they take lots of time to make. Unfortunately, it's a lot harder to make a video than it is to just write up a page. But sometimes I've noticed that text tutorials are not inadequate, but just like missing in certain parts. Like it tells you to do something and then it just stops. It doesn't explain it. Whereas in a video, I see more usefulness because as the professor is doing it, they end up explaining kind of slightly unconscious. But yeah, to the chat, video with closed caption would be good. Yeah.
So yeah, personally, I prefer text just because it's easier to find your problem at hand. I know a lot of the times students usually don't need help on steps A through Z. It's usually they might need help on C or D. And I think text is just easier to scroll down to that specific area, really focus in on that rather than having to worry about worrying about times to tune in and tune out.
Okay, and then we've got a question from Sid, or I guess a proposal from Sid that we make all students take 100% online class as part of every engineering program. So what are your reactions to that from our panel?
I think I think that's a good idea. So I've done an internship I did it at a security firm in New York about a year and a half ago, and I noticed that they use a lot of online communication resources. So having that experience in college, even though if like hopefully we go back to fully in person, having like one or two fully online classes will prepare them so that when they actually do go out into the industry and get a job, it's not just like a shock of oh, what is Microsoft Teams? What is Slack? Like they have an idea of how to use it and can adapt easier and faster.
I do think with all of the students who have experienced the pandemic and had to have that abrupt change, there might be an adverse reaction to it, maybe an avoidance to making that a requirement. I think that we all have a slight negative feeling towards online classes just because of the situation, but maybe for future classes of students that would change.
Yeah, I would say, in my opinion, I'm kind of in the same boat as what Omar was talking about, where I would just be really opposed to an online class when it could be in person. But looking forward into the future, I can see that being a good idea, as long as it's a course that doesn't really have like a lab component. I think having in-person labs to me are a lot more valuable than online. And I know from personal experience, the labs that I took pre-COVID, I learned a significant amount more and retained a lot more information from those than I have taking online labs during COVID. But I could see something like a professional communication course or something like that, where um, I guess would focus more on skills that you would need in an online environment, rather than something like a valuable lab course, I guess.
Absolutely. And there was a question much earlier in the chat as well about thinking about the tools that you've been using. So you may have been using pocket oscilloscopes like Analog Discovery and such in your classes while we don't have access to the labs. Do you think that you will still continue to use those in the future once you have access to the labs? And do you think they have value?
So personally, I do think I would use them in the future, and I do think they have value, just because I know a lot of the times taking my sensitive project to the lab, a lot of things could happen in that transportation time. And the fact that the pandemic has already kind of taught everybody how to use it, and a lot of professors have supportive material on how to go about maybe not testing things that have been tested in class, but maybe like, hey, if you want to use an oscilloscope for this or that, here are some additional resources. I think it just makes it a lot more convenient to have some equipment at home to use rather than having to go to a workspace that's kind of out of your way.
I have a questions for like TAs there. Have How many of you guys used like the National Instruments MIDAC? For reference, it's this little thing. Have you do you guys use this at all? Have you guys ever seen it?
I have not seen it, but I'm trying to think of what we would use some of these devices for. So a lot of our stuff is very project based. So in the past, students have always left their group project at like the labs, and they've only been open certain times. But I definitely do see a use in having like these portable instruments. Because at Duke, TAs have had a discussion about, do we think it should be a group, like the project should be a group in the future or more individual? And I think there's sort of a consensus that students enjoy this like individual component and also learn a lot more. So I definitely see having like these portable instruments available for individuals being more useful, especially because they have been taking their projects home with them.
Excellent, thank you. And we have time for one more question, and I see a question from Dave Poloian. He said, do you find yourself tinkering more if you have tools or lab resources at home?
Dave, to answer that, me myself, both yes and no. It depends really on if I have time, because since classes have gone online and I'm nearing the end of my college career, I end up being really busy and my workload's a lot. So sometimes if I have time, I'll build a random circuit or test something really small, but more often than not, it's just focusing on school rather than tinkering at home here.
I found for my students that the answer to this question is yes. But a lot of these students are still in their intro level courses. So they're taking things like biology, chemistry, and those labs cannot be taken home. So there might just be some additional fascination with having lab equipment at home when they haven't had in-person labs for a year.
So to follow up on that, I also do agree. I do like tinkering at home just because before the pandemic, I was the type of person where work is work, school is school. So if I was in a classroom lab doing a personal project, I kind of feel out of place.
To jump off of that, I initially, I guess, when COVID first started to hit, I did find myself tinkering with, some of the lab equipment that I had purchased for the course, just to kind of explore a little bit. But now that I've started to gain an understanding of things and have started to get into more advanced projects, I found myself going to more like labs and stuff on campus, just because they have equipment there that I, can't afford on my own or just don't have at my house.
And with that, this panel is a wrap. Thank you. So let's take a moment to thank all of our panelists for their insights and wisdom, and you definitely gave us a lot to think about as we move forward toward the fall. I'm going to hand it back to Claire, but I will say as well, panelists, if you have a few minutes to hang around during the 10-minute break, and if anyone else has questions, please feel free to stay around and we'll have a little bit of networking time. And with that, I'll hand it back to Claire. Thank you again.